Okay, so get this. We're doing a deep dive today into Just Dial Limited's financials. And it's a bit of a head scratcher, right? Like their last quarter took a dip, but overall, they're showing crazy strong growth. We've got their official statement right from the source, the Bombay Stock Exchange, the National Stock Exchange of India, and the Metropolitan Stock Exchange of India. Plus, we've got some expert analysis to help us break it all down. So how's Just Dial Limited pulling this off? Well, that's why we're here, it.
Yeah, that's a super interesting question. It's like hitting a speed bump, but still speeding up.
Yeah, exactly. So to get started, let's take a look at this official statement. Now, I know these financial reports can be a little, well, dry, but this one's a big deal, because it went out to all those major stock exchanges. So, Just Dial is playing in the big leagues now.
Definitely sets the stage for a serious conversation for sure. And you'll notice too, there's this limited review report that was done by Deloitte. That's basically like a mini audit. So it gives investors, a good amount of confidence in the numbers without having to do like a full-blown, super detailed audit.
Deloitte, those guys are the real deal, right? So, Just Dial is serious. Okay, so let's jump into the statement of unaudited financial results. Their net revenue from operations for the quarter that ended December 31st, 2024 was $2,873.3 million, which is up from $2,650.5 million for that same quarter in 2023.
Wow. So that's 8.4% year-over-year revenue growth.
Yeah.
Pretty significant jump, especially when you think about how the economy is doing overall.
Yeah.
Seems like they're not just keeping up, but actually taking more of the market,
Mm-hmm.
which is really, really positive.
Yeah, and profit before tax shot up too. For the 9 months ending December 31st, 2024, $4,846.2 million compared to $3,191.4 million during that same period last year. So things are definitely looking up for Just Dial.
Definitely. That kind of profit growth is nothing to sneeze at. Could mean they're getting more efficient, like maybe managing costs better or figuring out how to increase their pricing power. Either way, it shows they've got a pretty solid financial foundation.
Now, here's where things get kind of interesting. The statement mentions that their subsidiary, MYJD Private Limited, dissolved earlier this year. Yeah, I know it sounds a little technical, but basically it was a company that was fully owned and controlled by Just Dial Limited, and now it's gone.
That is interesting. Raises some good questions, right? Like, did closing down that subsidiary save them money? Or did it mean losing some revenue? The statement doesn't really say one way or another, but it makes you think.
It does, right? It's like we're missing a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and check out our second source, which kind of breaks down the performance in a simpler way. And the main takeaway here, strong year-over-year growth, even with that dip in the last quarter.
Exactly. It's like driving on a winding road.
Yeah.
You might hit a few bumps here and there, but you're still heading in the right direction overall.
Okay, I like that analogy. And just to back that up, revenue from operations went up 8.4% year over year, and net profit was even more impressive at 42.8% year over year.
Wow. Yeah, that 42.8% jump in net profit really stands out. Means Just Dial isn't just increasing revenue, but they're doing a great job of keeping expenses under control to really maximize their profitability. That kind of discipline is so important for long-term success.
Yeah, it's like they're really hitting their stride. But then there's this thing about the dip in the last quarter. Should we be worried?
I don't think so. Remember, we got to look at the big picture. One quarter could be affected by all sorts of things, and a dip doesn't always mean there's a big problem. The key is to see the overall trend,
Okay, well, that's good to hear. But what about this seasonal fluctuation the analysis mentions? What does that even mean? How can a company's finances be affected by, the seasons?
Right. Good question. A lot of businesses have their ups and downs during the year, right? And some of that is tied to what time of year it is. Think about it like a swimsuit company probably makes most of their sales in the summer.
Yeah, true. Makes sense. But Just Dial connects people with local businesses, so is there really something seasonal about that?
Well, that's what we got to figure out. Are there certain times of year when people might use Just Dial more or less? It's all about understanding how their business works, and what might be causing those changes.
So we're talking about, seasonality and how a company like Just Dial could be affected by it. So let's brainstorm here. What kind of things, could cause these ups and downs in their business?
Well, you got to remember, right? They're all about connecting people to local businesses.
Yeah.
So anything that, affects those businesses or the people using Just Dial could have a pretty big impact on how well they're doing.
Okay, so think about holidays, right? People probably spend more during Diwali or Valentine's Day. Could that, mean more business for Just Dial?
Yeah, totally. Those holidays could be like peak season for Just Dial because all these businesses are trying to get people to spend money, right? So they have to advertise more. And that's where Just Dial comes in, connecting those businesses with potential customers.
Okay, so holidays are good for Just Dial. But what about like the opposite? Are there times when people might not use them as much?
Hmm, that's a great question. Let me think. Are there times of year when people just, you know, aren't going out as much or not looking for new businesses?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, what about monsoon season? If it's like raining all the time and everyone's stuck inside, maybe they're not using Just Dial as much.
Yeah, that's a good point. The weather could definitely have an effect. And don't forget what we were talking about before, too, about the economy. If things slow down, businesses might start cutting back. And advertising is often one of the first things to go.
So even if people are still using Just Dial, if businesses aren't advertising, that could be bad for Just Dial.
Right, exactly. It's like a double whammy. And it shows how important it is for Just Dial to show their value. Like they have to prove to businesses that it's still worth advertising with them, even when times are tough.
Okay, so they have to like weather the storm, but also show why they're valuable. Makes sense.
Right. And it's not just dial. Like understanding the economy and how markets work, that's super important for looking at how any company is doing. It helps you see the bigger picture. You know what I mean?
Okay, so if we're trying to figure out Just Dial's finances, we can't just look at the numbers, right? We have to think about the whole context, like the industry, the economy, even the weather.
Exactly. It's like
Yeah,
it's like being a detective, right? Trying to put all the clues together.
I like that. But instead of using a magnifying glass, we're using financial statements. And instead of looking for footprints, we're tracking revenue and expenses.
That's a good way to put it. And the more clues we find, the better we can understand Just Dial and where they might be headed in the future too.
So what should we like keep an eye out for in
Yeah.
their future reports, things that might tell us how they're doing with these challenges?
Well, first, just keep watching those revenue and profit numbers. See how they change throughout the year. Are those dips just because of the season, or is there something else going on?
Okay, yeah. And what about that subsidiary that they closed? What's going to happen with that? Did it save them money like we were thinking? Or was it a bad move?
Right. Good point. We have to see how that plays out. And besides just the numbers, look at what moves they're making strategically. Like, are they changing things up to deal with those seasonal ups and downs? Maybe they're offering new services so they're not so vulnerable.
Yeah, or maybe they're going into new markets. Or, like making deals with other companies.
Exactly. They got to stay ahead of the game,
Right.
adapt to how things are changing, and make smart moves to be successful in the long run.
So we're not just trying to see how Just Style is doing, right? We're also trying to figure out their strategy, like how they're planning for the future.
You got it. It's all about understanding what they've done in the past, yeah, but also looking ahead and thinking about what might be next.
And, remember how that analysis talked about seasonal fluctuations? It got me thinking, like, what does that really mean for a company like Just Dial? What kinds of challenges are they facing? And how can we see if they're doing a good job handling them? I guess by looking at those future reports, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. What are the things that make things harder for Just Dial specifically? And how are they going to change their plan to make things smoother?
This deep dive has been like really insightful. We started off with this financial statement, and now it's like we're business experts trying to figure out how everything works.
I know, right?
So,
That's what's cool about this stuff. It's not just about numbers, you know? It's about understanding the story behind them, the choices that led to them, and where they might go next.
it's like we found this secret world, and we're just starting to explore it.
I like that. And there's always more to learn, always more to find out. That's what makes it so much fun.
Okay, so we've covered like a ton of stuff: revenue, seasonal ups and downs, strategy, challenges. But I keep coming back to this profit growth. It's really impressive, but can they keep it up?
Yeah, that's the big question. And it's worth digging into. We talked about how they're managing expenses well, but what else could affect their profits in the future? What should people be watching for if they're interested in Just Dial?
Okay, so let's pretend we're investors for a second. What are the things that could really make or break their profits?
Well, first we got to see what's behind those profits. Is it just that they're cutting costs? Or are they finding new ways to make money and grow their market share? Because cutting costs can only get you so far. At some point, you got to find ways to make the business bigger.
Okay, that makes sense. And speaking of getting bigger, how are they keeping up with like the internet and everything? The whole world of search and advertising is always changing, right? So they got to stay on top of things to be competitive.
Right. Are they using new technology, Trying out new platforms? Are they working with other companies to get ahead? All super important questions.
And remember that subsidiary we were talking about? We gotta see what happens with that in the long run. Was closing it down a good idea, or will it come back to bite them later?
Yeah, that's a big unknown.
Hmm.
And we can't forget about the competition either. Are there new companies popping up that could take over from Just Dial? Or are there old competitors doing things that could hurt their market share?
So much to keep track of. It's like a big chess game, right? Just Dial has to make the right moves to beat the competition, deal with the economy, and ultimately make more money.
It is like chess.
Mhm.
And every move has consequences. So it's not just about making good moves. It's about seeing what might happen next, even
Mhm.
if it's not what you planned, and changing your plan if you need to.
It's really interesting when you think about it. We often talk about seasonal trends as being tied to like holidays or the weather. But in business, those seasons can be like so much more.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, you think about back-to-school sales, right? Huge for retailers. Or tax season for accountants. Those aren't about a specific holiday or anything, but they happen every year. And they're a big deal for those businesses.
So for Just Dial, those seasons could be things like industry conferences or,
Yeah.
changes in the economy or even what their competitors are doing.
Exactly. You got to figure out what those cycles are, the ones that could affect their business. And then ride the wave instead of getting wiped out.
So like, let's say there's a big tech conference in one of their main markets. That could mean a ton of people needing things like hotels and restaurants and transportation, all stuff that Just Dial can help with.
Yeah, good example. And then on the other hand, what if a competitor starts a huge ad campaign or rolls out some new feature? That could really hurt Just Dial's market share.
It's like they're always playing offense and defense, right? Got to be ready for whatever comes next.
That's what makes it so interesting to watch. They can't just sit back and relax. They got to be creative and keep finding ways to get better.
So how can they get better? What are some big moves they could make to really cement their position and grow even more?
We've talked about a few things already, like offering more services.
Hmm.
That way they're not so dependent on one specific thing.
Hmm.
What if they went beyond just connecting people with businesses? Maybe offered booking services or reviews or even like exclusive deals.
That's a cool idea. And think about all that user data they have, right? They could use that to make personalized recommendations or even do targeted advertising. It would make them even more valuable for both users and businesses.
For sure. And partnerships are huge too. Teaming up with the right companies could open up all sorts of new possibilities, new markets, new customers.
This deep dive has been amazing. We started with the financial statement, and now we're talking about like the future of local search.
That's what I love about this stuff. Financial statements aren't just numbers. It's like peeking behind the curtain to see how a company really works. All the ups and downs, the wins, the potential.
And the coolest thing, this is just the start. There's always more to uncover, more to learn.
Totally. This was a deep dive into Just Dial Ltd. But it also gave you the tools to look at any company, any industry. Don't be afraid to ask questions, dig in and see what you can find.
So here's the takeaway. Just Dial Limited is doing some pretty cool things.
I mean,
They're growing like crazy, even with a few hiccups along the way. But whether they can keep it up depends on how well they adapt. The industry is always changing. So keep an eye on their strategy, their innovation, and how they handle those seasons we talked about.
and remember, those financial statements are like treasure maps, full of clues and hidden secrets. Keep exploring, keep learning. You'll be surprised what you discover.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Just Dial Limited. Until next time, keep those financial statements handy and those thinking caps on.